This is Billy Childs, and you are listening to Jazz is Not What You Think.
Hi, I'm here today with Billy Childs, best known as a great jazz pianist who's played with everyone. I mean, from Freddie Hubbard, J.J. Johnson, Chick, Wynton, Chris Botti, Yo-Yo Ma, Sting. But I believe his uncanny abilities is in being a composer, an arranger, and a conductor that set him apart from everybody else. Welcome, Billy.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here, and I'm going to bring you way back to your early solo career. And
okay.
I received an advanced cassette.
Cassette? What are those?
Yeah. Remember those things that they have things that kind of turn around? But
okay.
And it's from a wonderful lady who I know you know, Ann Robinson.
Oh, yeah.
And she and her husband, Will Ackerman, owned Windham Hill Records.
Right.
And she wanted me to hear this pianist that she was so excited that they signed. And I got the album, and I remember it like it was yesterday. The album is called, for those of you who don't have it, you need to listen to this album. Take, for example, this. And keep in mind, it was on Windham Hill, which was really back then, for those of you who know Windham Hill might agree with me, and then those who don't, it was more of a new age label that was sort of the vernacular and the what they called that music back then that was on Windham Hill. So here I'm listening to this jazz pianist that I'm being pitched by the record label owner and the publicist. And I listened to the first track, and if I remember, the first track was a track called Quiet Girl.
That's right.
And it had arguably a little bit of a softer sound, and you could see where this song could fit on Windham Hill. But once that song was over, you launched us into an entire repertoire of Billy Childs that was very different than that track.
Right.
And has been really not only a mainstay for me, but there's a track on that album that has become, at least for me, and I know for a lot of other musicians that I talked to, a jazz standard, Backward Bop.
Yeah, right.
So can you take us back to those days when you were signed by Windham Hill on a new age label? Were you thinking like maybe this isn't a fit, but I kind of see where they're going with this?
No, well, what happened was I was very proactive about the music that I wanted to put out there. I knew that it was really difficult to get a record label interested in, especially, I think, being from Los Angeles and playing jazz. There was kind of a stigma about getting with a label like Blue Note or Columbia or something that's going to be doable if I lived in New York. So, so I had to be proactive about just getting people aware. And being with Freddie, of course, was a big help to that. But what I did was I saved up all my money and I just recorded with friends of mine who happened to be extraordinary musicians in Los Angeles. I just went in the studio and did whatever I wanted, So I did an album called Midland, which was side A is much of the stuff that appeared on my later Windham Hill albums, like five or six jazz oriented tunes. The side B were like two opus compositions, one called Lunacy and the other called The Coming of Spring. And that album, I got this list of record labels to send this album to from the Freedom Brandon Fields. And
oh wow.
And he gave me this list, and it was Blue Note, it was Inner City Records, was oh God, I don't know, Max Jazz, all of these labels, and one of them was Hip Pocket Records, which was Andy Narell's company. And so Andy was the only one. There were a couple of rejection letters, but Andy was the only one that responded positively. But he said, we're going to do like the jazz stuff from side A. So that's how that started, you know. And, you know, Windham Hill was Windham Hill. They called it Windham Hill Jazz, actually. But Windham Hill had distribution with A&M, which, you know, distributed all over worldwide. So as far as being well distributed, it was a good label. The only thing that about it was Windham Hill, the name itself was like new age music was kind of a revolutionary type thing where it just kind of became its own entity, and Windham Hill was the label associated with that. But it was kind of in the view of many people in jazz, in the jazz industry, it was the antithesis of jazz, right? So to call it Windham Hill Jazz was kind of, it was tricky because you'd have a DJ look at the album and it'd say Windham Hill, and they don't look at the jazz part, they just look at the Windham Hill. Oh, this is
right,
you know, jazz. So that was kind of that was kind of an issue that was stumbling block. It'd be like, you know, if Blue Note wanted to start a classical label and call it Blue Note Classical.
Right. Sort of a little bit of a disconnect.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember back in the day. I mean, Windham Hill also had the Magenta label, which
that's true.
Mitchell Foreman was on there, and there were a couple other, you know, really interesting records, kind of fusion records at the time. And then Andy Narell, and I remember there was one album on I think it may have been Hip Pocket by a guy named Stephen Miller.
Oh yeah. But
and it was this
what he played. Well, Stephen Miller was also an engineer.
Yeah, he was an engineer for Windham Hill.
Yeah, because he engineered my fourth Windham Hill album. Portrait of a Player. But I don't want to give the impression that I am better or
no, of course,
you know, because they put me on the map. They were incredibly supportive. They had great executives: Larry Hayes, Sam Sutherland.
Wonderful. Really, it was a great label. And in fact, the thing that was interesting is that, you know, I got it right away because I happened to talk to the head honcho there. Said, look, we're starting to do some jazz, and I know we're not known for that, but that was my real introduction to you as a solo artist.
Yeah,
I mean, I knew you playing with Freddie and with JJ, but that was my first Billy Childs record, and it was a wonderful introduction. So I agree. It was, you know, kudos to Windham Hill for being smart enough to sign you.
But they also they didn't interfere creatively either, which was really nice. You know, it was great to. It did give me credibility because when people would get past the name of the label, we hear the music, when they say, oh yeah, this is jazz.
Well, I mean, it's undeniably jazz. In fact, whenever someone wants, and they ask me, why don't you play me something that it's complex, but it's really swinging and really fun to listen to, Backward Bop. I mean, you put that song on, it's hard not to just smile. And I know you've recorded that a couple times, and I like the different versions of it, but it's just, I mean, like I said, it's a jazz standard. You know, you can't get sick of that tune.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I've heard a few people play. There's a pianist in England named Gordon Beck who played, who did a cover of it, and then there was someone else. I can't remember, but it always is flattering to me to have people appreciate, you know, what I put out there. And it's an honor to have anything be called a standard.
Oh, well, you deserve it for sure. And the one thing I was going to say is that, you know, I mentioned this in the very beginning, you know, your compositional, your arrangements, you're being a composer and an arranger, a conductor. That's something that I it's a rare quality that you have. And in addition to doing that and some of the really cool theme projects that we should talk about, you seem to be attracted to vocalists. And what I've noticed in your work, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is you obviously have a really good ear of who are great vocalists who you want to have on your projects. But then I kind of feel like you push them a little bit out of their comfort zone, and the results are wonderful.
Well, yeah, I try, I don't consciously set out to push somebody into any direction just for the reason of pushing them. It's usually I have a musical goal in mind, and it may fall out of the box or out of the norm for what a vocalist or, an instrumentalist may be wanting to do. But nevertheless, I try to make it so that we can come close to that vision. So yeah, I've had, I think Dianne Reeves and I have, I think I'll written music that has stretched her a little bit, and that's a really great relationship, because she's such she's obviously the greatest jazz singer of her generation, and greatest living jazz singer, I think, right now, and also, but more than that, she is fearless, and is able to, and welcomes a challenge to make large statements, So yeah, I do love working with vocalists. I think there's a beauty in the combination of words and music. I like how vocalists can tell the story literally, but also be telling it in music language as well.
Yeah, and I think maybe the best example of your work with vocalists is your Laura Nyro project, and it was magnificent, and there were singers on there, whether it was Becca Stevens or SB Esperanza Spalding, just Ricky Lee Jones, just wonderful interpretations of song. What was your attraction? I mean, aside from the obvious why we all love Laura Nyro, what was so compelling for you to do it? A project based on the work of Laura Nyro?
Well, Laura Nyro has been part of my DNA, really. I learned piano playing her tunes. My older sister, Kirsten, was a Laura Nyro fan. And she would play, I would hear this music on the record player in her room, and it was like kind of a silent song. Especially her first 4 albums, they strike me as, there's a great writer, essayist, named Sheila Weller, who wrote a lot about Laura Nyro. And one thing she said was that, which I agree with, is that all of her music, the collection of her music, sounds like an opera where there are different recurring characters: the devil, God, mother, her father, errant lovers. It's all, in each song is kind of like a chapter, and it's all centered around New York City. So it turns New York City into this mythical, magical landscape where, like a movie, like an opera. That kind of compelled me, attracted me to Laura Nyro. In terms of the album, I really had been wanting to do it for like maybe 10 years before we actually did it.
Wow.
And I had thought about it a lot. And finally just settled on the idea of multiple singers. And so I called my really good friend, Larry Klein, and asked him if he would produce it. And it turned into much more like he just didn't take the producer role. It was more like a collaborative thing. We would bounce ideas back and forth, musical and sonic, and then I'd go off and do the arrangement or something. But having all of this kind of insight. And I know that Larry is really, really adept at working with singers and getting the business offer, but also he has an incredible capacity for sonic like things that can happen. And so it was a really great collaboration, and the album turned out really great.
It was absolutely stellar. And you just said something that I now understand the album a little bit more. You talk about the mythical characters, which I, quite frankly, did not get when I listened to Laura Nyro years ago. But I did get it when I listened to your project.
Really?
And that's kind of what I put my finger on now that I couldn't put my finger on before. There was this operatic sort of mythical thing going on with the different vocalists with different stories. And thank you. You just summed it up for me. Well, I couldn't quite think about it and articulate it, but that I think when people listen to that album, they get that. Maybe something that the writer that you talk about was expressing, and you were able to really sort of matriculate that into this project, which was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm glad you said that, because that's what we were going for. Trying to make the whole thing congeal into this organic whole, and centered around New York City and centered on these characters. It's almost like watching one of those movies watching a movie like Rashomon, where you have like the same thing, the same subject, but told from a different perspective,
Sure. And then there was another album. I can't remember whether it came before or after the Laura Nyro project, Acceptance, where it was my first introduction to Aubrey Johnson.
Oh,
right. And she is, when I heard her on your project, I was like, who is this? Of course, I had no idea that it was, Lyle Mays' niece.
Yeah.
And then of course, when she did that Lyle's final project with beautiful vocalists that I first heard on your album, it kind of all came together.
Yeah. Well, Lyle was a huge influence on me in many ways. And he was a great friend, and it was, painful. He died just before COVID, kind of like, but reared its ugly head here. And
I talked to him just before he passed. And I love, like you, I just love Lyle.
Did you actually talk to him? Because he had...
Yeah, I did. I did talk to him right before he started getting very ill.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, it was a beautiful conversation. Actually, it became a podcast, some of it.
Really? Wow.
And he said some pretty incredible things before his passing. And one of the things that he said, which I've talked to a lot of musicians about, when he really stopped recording, and I asked him, I said, it seems like, he kind of left the music business. And his response was, no, Michael, the music business left me. And it was so deep. And that's the way he was. Lyle was just a really brilliant, very deep person. And we miss him very much.
Yeah, I really do. But he lives on through Aubrey, I think, And it was just, it was really, she's such a sweet person and such a talented singer, and very unique voice, very capable of singing, crazy melodies, and beautifully pure voice. And it was just great to work with her,
Yeah. Well, okay. So the most recent studio recording that people should know about, The Wind of Change, and on Mack Avenue, and tell us a little bit about that project. You have some really great players on that album, and the results are not surprisingly great. And then I want to talk about something else after that, but tell me about that project. So that was recorded like less than a year ago, like right after the pandemic.
Yeah, that was, let me see, when was that recorded? That was recorded, a ways after the pandemic. It was recorded in May, like a year ago, basically. May of 2022. And it was with Ambrose Akinmusire, Brian Blade, and Scott Colley. Really,
I mean, just the best.
yeah. So there were two things that kind of were that jump started the idea in my head. One was the idea of these movie themes, because I used to watch movies, especially film noir movies, with my mom, you know, and George Raft and Humphrey Bogart. You know, she liked the slang of the seedy cityscapes. Oh, the little private investigator talking and trying to, you know, operate in this kind of sewage of you know, characters and so anyway, she's it was fun to watch that with her. So two movie themes kind of stick out in my mind as emblematic of that ethos. One is the theme from Chinatown. Other is a theme from Taxi Driver, which I think both of those movies came out the same year. 73, if I'm not mistaken. But Taxi Driver was written by the great Bernard Herrmann, and
Sure.
Chinatown was written by the great Jerry Goldsmith. And they both kind of, like Chinatown, the movie, the music kind of romanticizes the urban part of LA, you know, in LA of that time, you know. And Taxi Driver kind of romanticizes New York, the urban New York of the 70s. You know, we have steam rising out of the manholes, and you have lights flashing through the windows of the cab. So that was one motivation. I wanted to kind of recreate that scenario, especially in the title cut, The Winds Have Changed. But also the other motivation is like the album New High by Kenny Wheeler. Was, you know, the playing, the interaction is so beautiful between King Jarrett, Dave Holland, Kenny Wheeler, and Jack and Jeanette. And I thought that Ambrose, Brian, and Scott would be able to have similar conversations. So I wrote music that was, you know, constructed with some specificity, but I didn't direct anybody to do anything. Well, very guiding statements, but not specific, not exact in things. And so because I wanted everybody to just interpret the music and have the chips fall where they may.
Well, it's a wonderful project, and so that's the last thing I've heard from you. But the one thing that I really wanted to talk about today, because it's for people who don't know, it's something that I know you're extremely passionate about, and that's Labyrinth. And this whole piece for big band, rhythm section, orchestra, these big projects, you seem to have an uncanny knack for them. And can you tell us a little bit about the orchestral, the big sound, the things that are quite different than, you know, the quartet and some of the other works you've done?
Yeah. Well, actually, I should preface it by saying that part of the reason that I started doing these Mac Avenue albums is because for a number of years, maybe over 10 years, I was doing these huge, lofty projects, you know. The last one being Labyrinth, a piece that I wrote for Temple University with Terrell Stafford and Dick Oates in the front line, and a big band and strings and French horns and stuff like that. They just recorded it, actually. But I mean, in the past couple of years, I wrote a violin concerto for Rachel Barton Pine, the great classical violinist. They're actually going to be performing it this coming summer at the Hollywood Bowl with the LA Phil on July 27th. And then I wrote a saxophone concerto for Stephen Banks, an incredible classical saxophonist. Going to be played at the National Symphony in Detroit, the Symphony in San Diego. It's like 10 different orchestras and string quartets, a piece for trio, piano trio, and string orchestra. A piece for percussion ensemble. It's crazy. I don't know. It started, actually, the first person to ever give me a commission was Steve Houghton, great drummer and percussion educator. I'm not sure if he's still at Indiana University or if he retired. But he wanted me to write a piece for percussion and orchestra. And then again, he commissioned me to write a piece for percussion and concert band, which got recorded with him playing. And in fact, that's where Backwards Bop actually first came from, was that piece.
Wow.
So, I got that. And then ever since then, I think I've had, since then is like from 93, I think. He commissioned me in 86 to write the piece for percussion and orchestra. But since 1992 or 93, I started on another commission, and then I haven't stopped. Like every year, it's at least 2 or 3 things. I don't know how I fell into that, but
wow. Well, but I haven't heard, because I know you just recorded it, and I'll thankfully get to hear it soon. But I read your description of your latest commission, and I'll read it. A maze-like sense of imbalance through constantly shifting meters. Yeah. Which to me, I have this thing that I always think about: homeostasis. It's balance in the face of change. And it sounds pretty interesting. And can you tell us what you mean by that?
Well, I wanted, especially the first part of it. It has what I always try to do with music that I wrote that has shifting meters is create a sense of logical continuum. There's kind of there's a sense of it sounds kind of odd, but it sounds almost like it should go to this next place, but or you look at a maze where there are right turns and then left turns and then you go straight. That's what the piece is trying to evoke, You may have a motif that goes ba 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 da bum ba 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 ba, and then the second time it just goes ba 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 da ba 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 ba, which is slightly different. I cut out 2 beats there, but what that does is when you cut out 2 beats or add 2 beats, it changes the whole complexion of the melodic line, which makes you go in another direction. If you open you make a right turn instead of a left. And so that's kind of the sense that I wanted to evoke, at least in the first part. And there's a lot of counterpoint also. It was this section is playing this line, da-da-da, 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 da-da. And another one is doing an answer. Things are working in counterpoint to each other, like kind of a puzzle where the pieces kind of fit together. So it just brought to my mind something like a labyrinth.
Wow. So you seem to love conducting too. It's how much conducting work? Because on a lot of these commission pieces, I'm assuming you're a conductor.
No, actually, I'm not. I conducted well in the studio, but in terms of conducting highly complex music, I'm not there yet with my baton technique. You have to have someone. And when I the violin concerto that I wrote, it's like a 37-minute piece, and it has so many moving parts and so many variables. I can tell you how it goes. I can sit in the rehearsal in a chair with the scoring, saying, that B flat should be B natural. But to wave my arms so that people can follow me, that's a whole art form.
Interesting. Well, I can't wait to hear it. I hear we're going to hear it soon, so I'm waiting, and I'm waiting for that. And what's your next project? What are you working on now?
Right now, I'm working on a piece for the Los Angeles Master Chorale, my jazz chamber ensemble, which is piano, bass, drums, acoustic guitar, harp, and string quartet, and Akiko Myers, great concert violinist. So we're going to do that, and it's going to be performed in November.
Do you plan on? I know you big performing artist. You plan on recording this at all and putting it out for consumption?
If I can get a really good list of donors, that can help finance it, because something like a big project like that is real expensive to do.
Sure.
You have union standards you have to meet, and just the sheer volume of musicians and the difficulty of the music. It would be a challenge, but I really, that's one of my bucket list things to do, is to record a lot of these huge projects.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess naively I thought you bring some microphones and recording equipment and when you're doing it live, but I could imagine it's a lot more complex than that.
Well, when you do it live, you can get, like, if you have, like, there is an archival recording of the Grant Park Orchestra playing it, that is, they, can't be, heard, because of union, things. But, they, when they play it, an orchestra of that caliber, it sounds almost like a record. It sounds almost like a professional recording, because they're so good that they only need, one take. Then there's like there may be, in really great orchestras, there may be like one or two like mistakes, but they go by so fast they don't matter, really. They're not full works.
Well, we hope to hear them. Maybe we should work together on getting a fundraiser for these projects, because there's no reason people shouldn't be able to hear this anytime, anywhere.
There is a reason: money.
Yeah, that's all. That's unfortunately always the reason.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. Yeah, I would love to get a recording of the violin concerto out there, and the saxophone concerto and Labyrinth, and the piece. There's a piece that I wrote called "My Roots Spread Far and Wide," project called Trilogy, and it was. There were three composers who were from California based. Stephen Mackey, great composer, not California based, but California born, because Stephen Mackey, I think, is at Princeton now teaching. And a great young composer, Gabriella Smith, who's amazing. And the three of us wrote a piece for this incredible string group called Delirium Music on a 16-piece string orchestra. So wow. I wrote something for my jazz trio and them, and it's each of us had a tree that we had to describe in our piece or be inspired by. So my tree was the California redwood, not the California sequoia, and Mackey's piece was the redwood, and Gabriella's was Joshua tree. And we did a concert. Now I would love to record that as well.
You're doing a lot. And again, I'm just going to reiterate, I think a lot of people would love to hear these projects. And we have to figure out a way to make that happen.
Yes.
You and I will definitely stay in touch, because it's a passion of mine. I mean, I love introducing people to music. I mean, I remember back in the 80s, introducing through Jazziz people to Billy Childs, and they were like, "Wow, I've never heard him. He's amazing." And that's what we love to do.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Well, again, I appreciate your time today. It was so great to connect. Like I said, I know we have a lot of mutual acquaintances, and but this is the first time in 40 years of me doing this that we had a chance to meet. Wow. So thanks for the time, and I hope we can do it again.
40 years, like. So since 1983, or man.
1983, that's when it started.
Ah, wow. Yeah, time just keeps going.
Keeps going. But until next time, we'll do this again.
Okay. Looking forward.
Really, so good to see you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being on the show. You bet.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.